And Scott, what are we seeing behind you on your screen? That's a great photo.
Yeah, we've got some nice backgrounds to use here at the association. We've got the Capitol building in DC, and I grabbed that one this morning because we've got a team that's up on the Hill the last couple days doing making some good congressional visits to members and some of our own members in town to push for a couple of legislation pieces that we've been really working hard on. One is continuous improvement and accountability in organic, which works to streamline how the standards process works and making it a little more efficient with the National Organic Standards Board and National Organic Program and some other great issues. So
Yeah. There's definitely been a lot going on in Capitol Hill this week. I wasn't able to be there yesterday, but there was also almost an all-day hearing at the Federal Maritime Commission talking about some of the issues relating to shipping, which all of the importers on this particular webinar, I'm sure, have been keeping an eye on, with updates on the Red Sea situation. Whether it's the issues of freedom of navigation, whether it's, what we should be doing politically to secure the Red Sea and Canal area. But that was kind of interesting to listen in to shippers all over the country. And a lot of them are agriculture exporters as well. There's a lot of ag product going out of the US into the Mideast area that is getting affected by the situation. So many of my colleagues were on the Hill yesterday as well. So
bet.
yeah, busy times, a lot going on.
A lot, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and we were getting very close to 1 o'clock. We've got about 28 people logged in, and we'll give it one more minute just to let a few more people join, and then we will get this webinar kicked off. As people are rolling in, I will say we will try to keep this between 30 and 45 minutes. It may go a little longer. But we do try to get through as much material as quickly as possible and be conscious of everybody's time schedules. This material is important, but I think we also can be pretty efficient in getting through the data. And we'll just kind of start rolling into this. This is our second webinar of the year on the new Strengthening Organic Enforcement Regulation. A lot of you that are participating today attended our January 10th webinar. And we covered a lot of different things at that webinar and spent the last part of it on this particular rule. And I will say that we had so many questions that were generated. We did do a follow-up FAQs from that webinar, just trying to cover as many of the questions that all of you had as possible, and decided also to run a second webinar to try to dig deep into some of those questions and add new information as it comes along. I think most of you probably know me or have heard from me on these either webinars or in person. My name is Allison Levitt. I am the Managing Director of the Wine and Spirits Shippers Association. I was also at WSWA last week, the Wine and Spirits Wholesalers Association conference. And I would say almost everyone I spoke to about this situation either was unaware that they were affected by it or unaware of the rule. So we really feel it's important to get the information out there. We are super happy again to have Scott Rice joining us. Scott is the Regulatory Director of the Organic Trade Association. I will just pull up his bio here. You can see just through reading this, the incredible experience that Scott has, direct experience with organic certification, USDA accreditation. He has been incredibly helpful in explaining the regulations and the processes to comply. I do encourage any of you who have an organic program and are not part of the OTA to join. This, as he was just speaking before we started, the trade association is very active on Capitol Hill with anything to do with organic, but things like, as you were just saying, trying to work on the standards, make things a little more clear in the organic world. So Scott will be a big part of the webinar today and will help us get through this material. So just Quickly too, again, I think most of you are familiar with WSSA, but I always just reiterate our key core pillars, as we like to call them. We, as an association, were founded back in 1976, so we're a pretty old association, one of the oldest in the country, registered. We were formed through a collaboration of other associations, NABI being one of them, the National Association of Beverage Importers, and the Wine and Spirits Wholesalers Association. And basically as a association to work on the actual shipping of beverage alcohol product. So we are, our first mission and still our top priority is freight negotiation, working with all of the global ocean carriers to get both the best rates, services, port pairs, and work with them to give you the best possible availability of shipping in the beverage alcohol sector. Our second pillar is to cover basically the risks of shipping. And we operate a massive insurance program covering over $1 billion worth of product, shipping to and from virtually every country, product in warehouses, product on airplanes, intermodal, you name it. It's a big part of what we do for the industry. And last but not least, this type of education, advocacy, intel, providing information for the industry. I will say briefly on the risk management piece, we did run a webinar a couple of days ago just talking about the risks in the current environment of local and global violence, whether it is the situation in the Ukraine, the situation in the Red Sea, or the situation with farmers protesting, whether it's in Spain or France, and the incidents that can come from what we would call civil commotion, strikes, riots, as well as, you know, the war clauses. So a lot to be aware of right now in the industry, and we're here for you to be a resource. What we want to start with is basically the overview of the law. This is, I think, pretty clear to most everybody now that this rule is in place, and basically it was implemented to, I said, strengthen organic enforcement and to reduce fraud, increase traceability, increase responsibility in this area. I think what most of you may not be aware of is that the rule has been in place since January of 2023 with this 14-month implementation period. And we are now nearing the end of the implementation period and heading into the enforcement period. So Scott, I don't know if there's any particular item on this slide that you want to highlight or point out for people.
I think, you know, it's a good overview, and appreciate the background on that. I think, yeah, it's one thing I always like to remind folks is the implementation period was the same for the trade and for the certification community. So nobody had a jump start on this. We were all on the same path to kind of get our systems up and running. So personally, I think it would have been a little bit smoother if we did have the certifiers with a kind of head start to get their systems in place, and we probably would have headed off some of the questions that all of you have had regarding this particular area. But needless to say, we're very close to enforcement, and I think things are coming together, and we're working hard to make it as smooth as possible.
And, you know, I think this is in some ways, unfortunately, typical of so much legislation where rules are passed and then we got to figure it out after the fact. And again, any of you on the line who had dealt with CBMA, exactly the same thing. Laws passed and there was no time to implement. And that was an incredible struggle. And I can say the same thing for the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. It was passed. There's lots of regulation in there, and they're still trying to figure out actually how to enforce some of the reasonable behavior defined by the law. So as much as we would all, you know, like things to be different, it does tend to be the case where we're kind of, you know, running to catch up to the regulation. So this next slide just basically highlights where it states that organic importers must be certified. I think when this rule first came out, there really wasn't awareness in the importing community that they would be that this rule would have any impact on them. And in fact, there actually was some differing information that came out even from the USDA as to who needed to be certified. And there are some discrepancies in the language of the law that we'll point out a few times in this particular webinar that kind of contradict each other. So I think there's a lot of information in the law about if you just deal with ready to sale, tamper resistant or tamper proof product, that you would be exempt. But in this case, it is the act of importing that is triggering the need for certification. So after, a bit of back and forth, we have been out there for the last, 6 months or so, trying to get the importers aware that they must become certified if they handle organic product. And again, Scott, any comments on this particular slide and the information?
Just to kind of echo your comment, Allison, there's a lot of if and buts, howevers that are kind of worked throughout the organic regulation, where if read on the section alone, and perhaps you could say this about regulation in general, it might appear to be meaning or conveying something, but you really have to take the rule as a whole, and we'll kind of point out kind of what that means and how that works with this particular one in a few moments. But
okay. Sorry, my computer's jumping a little. Okay, so in terms of who needs to be certified, this list, we've tried to cover everyone, in terms of the beverage alcohol industry who would be affected. It's not new for bulk producers, bulk importers. It's not really new for U.S. exporters, but really it is the importers of organic product, whether it is in tamper evident packaging or not. But I think we put that in there to make it clear that many of much of the feedback we've heard is that, I'm importing in products that are ready for retail sale. I don't need to be certified. We just are kind of stressing that is not the case, whether it's in bulk or tamper evident packing, ready for sale, you've got to be certified. So also, if you are a USA distributor, wholesaler, and you have imports that are directly under your importer number, you are the importer, you are also in that category of needing to be certified. I think one point that we are still waiting for clarification, but it's for the current analysis, would be for subsidiaries. If you have multiple companies that have discrete operations with their own importer of record number, as far as we know right now, those individual entities will need to be certified, even if you're working out of the same location. We were trying to get clarity on that. And Scott, I don't know if you have had any other insight on the concept of subsidiaries.
Not since we spoke, but definitely working to get some finer detail on that.
Okay, so we may have more to offer on that at some point, but right now we are recommending that if you do have subsidiaries, that you do work on getting each of those certified. Okay, so we're getting into the areas that came up in the FAQs that came out of our last webinar, and there's a lot of distinctions with organic products in terms of made with organic grapes, items listed on ingredient labels, 100% organic. TTB has their definitions. I think certainly the organic associations and organic companies have the distinctions depending on what the products are. So this is one area where the ingredients list has come up quite a few times, and we just have a sample of that ingredients list. If you look on the right-hand side of the slide, where it shows just made with organic Malbec plus this plus that. If it is just on the ingredients list and you don't have any other organic product that is either made with organic grapes or certified organic, if it's just an organic product, a portion of the product that is made with organic grapes, the analysis right now is that you do not need certification, or that SKU would not need an NOP. Scott, again, if you can elaborate a little on that, it would be wonderful.
Sure. Yeah, as Allison said, there's a distinction in our various label claims, and I think there's a lot of wine that obviously comes from the EU. In the EU, they allow organic wines to be produced with sulfites added. in the US for an principal organic claim, that is not allowed. So for those of you that are bringing wine in, what we often see is that either that EU logo or an organic claim on the principal front label will be stripped and maybe still remains on the rear label. If that is the case, that would still require certification. So really, just to put a fine point on it, the only time that certification is not required is if it's listed as limited rather to ingredients. Anytime there is an organic or a made with organic claim, that requires certification.
And we had I heard one of our members talk about if the bottle was marked with EcoCert on the bottle. Is that what you're talking about when you say that something it's certified in Europe, say, and it's got an EcoCert label, and the USA importer may not be declaring it as organic, but it actually would fall into this category because it has that label on it? Am I interpreting that correctly?
That's been our understanding as to date. Again, this is new in terms of pulling more people into the certification process, and so I think we'll be kind of seeing how that looks. But to date, right now, our understanding is any certification claim, any certifier logo, any organic logo would trigger that need for certification.
Okay. And this slide just kind of clarifies that the made with organic grapes would fall into that, need to be certified category. It's not just on the ingredient list, it is made with organic grapes. So does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, there's not a lot of exemptions here, and I think that the fact of those labels from a foreign supplier that you may not be paying attention to now, that does become very important. Okay, when we talk about if you're a USA distributor of alcohol and you are not importing any organic wine and only dealing with USA produced organic wine, the analysis right now is that you do not need to be certified. Again, this comes down to some of that language in the law, which we'll show in a couple of slides where we talk about some of the exemptions where they talk about sale or trading. But as of now, if you are a if you are a distributor in the USA and not importing but handle domestically produced organic wine, you do not need to be certified. That could change again as this rule gets further defined, but that's the interpretation right now. In terms of exporting from the USA, exporting organic wine, there's really no change in the sort of the organic rules that you, the exporter, would follow. It is really all about making sure you're in compliance with your destination country's organic requirements. And Scott, anything to add on that?
I think probably most of your non-retail containers, meaning your cases and your pallets, are evident from a label on the exterior that what is contained within is organic wine. But this regulation does require those non-retail containers to indicate that the contents is organic. So just keeping that in mind as well. Again, you are not required to be certified, but because of the nature of it being a sealed tamper evident package, but you would still need to label those containers as organic.
Okay. And I guess the traceability, was that something that the domestic distributor should be conscious
Yeah,
of?
thank you. The exemption would stand with the caveat that you would maintain records in the event that NOP, as they were doing a supply chain audit, may prompt you for the records of your handling and trading of that product.
Okay. All right, so the deadline, there is right now, the published deadline of March 19th. We are, I think, looking at that in a way as a soft deadline. There is no ability within sort of the SOE rule that they can, they do not have stop sale authority on the organic product. So our expectation is right now that if you are not certified by the deadline, it is not like your product will be held at the port. We expect it will go through the entry process and be delivered. And just again, Scott, I think you've been looking into this quite a bit. If you want to comment on some of what you think the process will look like for the importers if they are not certified.
Yeah, I think Jennifer Tucker, the deputy administrator at the National Organic Program under USDA, she's been in her speaking points has referenced this as a process more than event. The law is the law. We do have an enforcement date, but I think that the attitude will be leading with a carrot versus a stick initially, informing, educating for folks that were unaware of their need to be certified. That will move as we get further into enforcement. That will move to warning letters, and of course, as with any law, if there is just willful ignorance or refusal, then they will pursue further measures that they have authority to do so. But initially, we're expecting more of an outreach and education than and as Allison said, we do not see that product will be stopped or interrupted.
Well, that, like I said, that is the expectation. And also I don't, there's not necessarily the actual ability of the USDA to actually stop the sale or stop the shipment. I think the key thing is for those of you who have not yet started to work on your certification and you need to get it, is to start getting in touch with the certifier and start the process. I've talked to quite a few importers who are either in the midst of the process or almost finished with the process. And it is not incredibly cumbersome. And I will say, out of these certifiers that we have listed, the top 3 that we list have had involvement with beverage alcohol. I would say, and I don't want to really be in the position of recommending one over the other. That is up to you. But the feedback that we've had on NFC has been very good in terms of the efficiency and the price and the actually fairly quick to act. What we are hearing on the kind of timeframes is that between 3 and 5 weeks, they are able to get someone out for a site visit, and that you do not necessarily have to fill out all of the required forms right at the beginning of the process. So there's 6 or 7 forms that are part of the certification process that you can, get one of I think the first form is the form 200. You get that first form out to a certifier that can get the ball rolling, and you can work on a lot of those other forms as you go along. What we're hearing too, in terms of the price tag, there is a price to this, and it is an annual event. For say a mid-size importer, we're hearing about $1,500 on the certification process. Again, this will vary by certifier. You will want to try to find a certifier that does have someone who can do a site visit pretty quickly. They're having people on the ground near to your location. I think the other question that has come up is, look, I'm an importer in New York City. I've got 6 people in my office. I've got 3 warehouses. I don't even see the product. Why do they have to come to my office? Unfortunately, that seems to be the process, that they will come to your actual office. They will want to know about your warehouses, and there is a form that warehouses are required to fill out, a non-certified handler affidavit, just certifying some of their processes. So again, the certification process does not seem to be incredibly cumbersome, but we suggest you get started. And Scott, please jump in and comment on what you've seen in the industry and how the certification process is going.
Sure. Yeah, I would say, the certification of importers is just one part of the strengthening organic enforcement rule, and certifiers are pretty flat out in the work that they're undertaking, and seeing a lot of new operations coming into certification. So there is a bit of a backlog with some of them, and I think patience will be key, but they're working through it as we roll into this. And in terms of that choosing a certifier, I think one thing I always recommend, especially with on the import side, because you will be needing to request import certificates, understanding what that certifier's timelines are for that, how far in advance, that will just kind of help you plan accordingly. And one thing that is allowed under this law is the ability to issue a certificate for a period of time or volume of quantity. And that will be based on how the certifier has a risk assessment of your particular product. But with wine, I think it won't be uncommon to see an import certificate that will be issued for that year's bottling. I think there's understanding that you may not know right at the front end how much volume may be coming out of that year, and there'll be some allowance to have a certificate that you don't have to, for every single shipment, be coming back to the certifier. But that'll be a conversation between you and your certifier to determine that.
Thank you. Yeah, very helpful. As said, I think many of the wine importers, generally have a pretty good sense of what's coming in the year and the number of SKUs, but things can change. So again, we are getting a few questions coming in that we will get to as we go along. And there is a question on the NOP certificate as an example. We will get into what that looks like and the process. So we'll get to that one in just a few minutes, and then we'll get through the other questions more near the end as we try to get through this material first. So exemptions, I think this is the other area that we touched on before. I think some of these are fairly obvious, your customs broker, freight forwarder, these entities that are not directly involved with the actual product are exempt. And again, in this particular exemption, it does note, entities conducting other handling such as selling. Importing we've talked about, but the fact that they use the word selling in this description, I think that's can be very confusing, because when we were talking about the domestic distributors that handle only domestic organic wine being exempt, they are obviously selling that wine. Yet here, they list selling as an area not exempt. So I think that's some of the just problems within the law that we're, we don't need to get into the weeds on that. The bottom line here, we're going to accept these exemptions. It makes sense. The second being basically the warehouses. So as mentioned, warehouses that are just storing product ready for retail will be exempt. As mentioned, they may need to sign an affidavit as part of the certification process, and there'll be some record keeping requirements in terms of tracking and traceability of the organic product. And again, transportation companies, truckers, transloaders. This one too, to me, the language is problematic because these people are combining and containerizing product. I think that they're not combining it in terms of, blending and mixing products. So I think that's, where the language can be misconstrued, but, combining product ready for retail sale, I think is the factor here. So again, Scott, any comments on kind of some of these exemptions?
Sure. I think this is one of those where read solely as it is here, it certainly is could be confusing. And I think when we look at that first bullet and it lists selling, I think you have to reference back again to that exemption for sealed, tamper evident package, and that will that's the portion then that allows you to continue to be exempt if you fall into that customs broker or freight forwarder, et cetera. I think when we talk about containerizing, packing, repacking, sorting, you know, you all were not the audience necessarily for this particular part. This was targeted in great part to the produce industry, where before we had this rule, we had a lot of mixing, and we would see incidents of here's a half full box of oranges, we're going to top those up. Those may have been organic, they may not have been. I'm not saying that is rampant, just as a finding in the industry, that there could be some tighter oversight to really maintain that organic integrity. So when we're talking about, again, that sealed, tamper evident package, that's where with wine and spirits, that's where you would fall in there.
Great. Okay, so labeling of non-retail containers, I think this is something that it should also be addressed, and Scott, you had touched on it in an earlier slide in terms of what information needs to be on containers that are not intended for retail, or the ones that are intended. So just wanted to see if you can give us a little more insight onto this labeling issue.
Yeah, as I jumped ahead a little before, but as noted, I think clear, as it says here, clear identification of a product as organic, and that indicator must be, you must have organic on all of your record keeping throughout that supply chain. I know in the past there may have been, an accounting on certain documents of product, or type of product, wine or what have you, but it may not have always said organic. That's what this law requires now. So just ensuring that all of your documentation does include that, and that it includes information that is unique identifiers that will allow that product to be tracked and traced through the supply chain. We have had a lot of discussion around bulk imports. So for those of you that have bulk wine moving through, the law does require that be that bulk containers be labeled, indicated with organic, and again a unique identifier for that. We've seen some creativity and some problem solving around this. There's certainly continues to be some hand-wringing around some of the more challenging parts, especially when some of those bulk containers and conveyances are moving through hands that don't have a financial stake or responsibility in that. It makes it harder to ensure that organic label is maintained throughout. And in turn, ensuring that organic label is removed if that's a container or conveyance that is going to be reused for further down the line. But we're working through those challenges. Hopefully, with all of you, there's some easier ways to label depending on what your product looks like, or what that bulk packaging is. But then just lastly, that audit trail documentation needs to identify also the last certified operation that handled the product, so that when a supply chain audit is conducted, or at your inspection with your certifier, they can see, they can follow your product back and ensure that it has been, that organic integrity has been maintained.
I think two items from a kind of a logistics and shipping point of view that we are looking at, as noted in that top bullet point, that it must note organic product on the bill of lading. A container may have both organic and non-organic product inside that container. There may be 2 pallets of organic wine and 18 of non-organic. I do not have yet a distinction on how that needs to be listed on the bill of lading. Whether it can just say, container includes organic product, or if it needs to be more specific, or have the SKUs on there. And Scott, I don't know if you've heard anything directly on the bill of lading issue and how specific it needs to be.
I think if the product if there is clear identification of the product that is organic as organic, I think that would meet the requirement. And as far as, I mean, if you've got a
So if that was on a
container,
packing list, that would be enough, and the bill lading could just say contains organic product, or
all of your documents will need to indicate it as organic, and there'll need to be a clear link to the last organic handler. If you can provide that information, if there is I suppose you could have duplicate documentation, but as long as your system is able to show that how that product has moved through and it has been handled organically, that's really the bottom line on this.
okay. I think this will be an area where we'll get into the weeds a little bit on, in terms of looking at the, how specific it needs to be, and whether it can just reference the packing list or something. But as I said, this is new data for us, so we'll have to get some of the nitty-gritty details worked out. I think the flexi tanks is another, kind of, as you said, the bulk is an interesting point, and we talked a little bit about using the container seal. As we know, any of you who are on the line who import flexis, that bag gets disposed. Perhaps there would be a sticker on the actual flexi that shows organic, but I think tying the flexi to the container and the seal number would be adequate in terms of that audit trail.
And a quick clarification, when we talk about containers, if you have a container arriving with a mixed load of organic, non-organic, we're not suggesting that entire container of mixed product would need an organic indicator on the exterior. I think you're gonna see the requirement of those individual boxes, cases, pallets are clearly identified inside.
Yeah, I don't, I think that makes sense. There's, we're not going to throw an organic placard on a, outside of a steel container. It will be, yes, on the bill of lading, on the actual cartons within, a packing list, et cetera. So some of this has to be, reasonable. So, okay, I think that's pretty clear. We just have a few more slides getting into the actual NOP import certificate and what it actually looks like. There was a question on the National Organic Program import certificate, and basically was asking if I'm going to scroll into the question. So the NOP, what the term means, yes, it is the National Organic Program certificate. I think what's interesting about the certificate, that needs to be started by the actual exporter, and the certificate will go through the whole life of the shipment. And I think, Scott, I think it would help to understand how that ties into the organic integrity database as well. So I'd love to hear from you on kind of just that flow of how that NOP from overseas starts.
Sure. So your exporter in, say, the EU will work with their certifier and provide them the information of what they are exporting, and that certifier will verify that there is that it truly is organic. It was produced organically, has a certificate, and that certifier will generate an NOP import certificate from the Organic Integrity Database, which is the database that the USDA maintains of all of the USDA certified organic operations and accredited certifiers, and there's a module in that. It's only certifier facing, so it's not something that you or I can see, but that will be generated by the exporter's certifier provided electronically to the exporter, who can then provide that to the importer. And the importer will provide that to the customs broker if they themselves are not a customs broker, who will then upload that information into the CBP ACE system. You shouldn't really see, I mean, the certificate from equivalent countries and regions, such as the EU, has been in place, the requirement for that NOP import certificate. The difference here is that it's now being generated out of the integrity database. You shouldn't see too much of a difference in terms of how you've been handling those and uploading that data to the ACE system, with the exception that we're going to see a couple additional fields that indicate that product as organic and the unique certificate code.
I'm going to jump to the actual form just for a second, because since we're jumping into that, and I think and there was, there was one question about, will suppliers be completing the electronic certificates? As noted, the certificates actually are done by the certifier, because that is the only, the access is via the certifier. That's correct, right, Scott?
That is my understanding, that you'll provide the information to complete this, but it's the certifier that is generating it.
Yeah, so the certifiers, I'm assuming, have a nice little money-making, I don't want to say it's a money-making scheme, but there is money involved in having these generated, but it's also, people who know what they're doing, supposedly, and have access to these databases. So these are the fields on the actual NOP import certificate. And, a couple things that we would point out in terms of just how the data is uploaded, transmitted. We would call all of these agencies, whether it's USDA, TTB, FDA, partner government agencies. And fortunately, really since the Obama administration, they have been linked through the ITDN, the International Trade Data Network. So for customs brokers now, the integration between the different agencies as they file these documents is much smoother, and there is this transmission of information between agencies. So it does work pretty well. And I think any of you, obviously, whether it's a TTB COLA, whether it's the NOP, the system is pretty smooth in terms of uploading the documents and that flow. So Scott, I think you were mentioning some changes on the NOP from where it is today, but where it will be under the SOE.
Specific the certificate? Or...
So is there and I mean two things on that. I mean the field 7 where the recipient, we've talked a little bit about how that recipient information, and if, when you're a certified recipient, how that transmits into the system, and they will be listed, the recipient will be listed in this particular field 7. We don't know if your individual certification number will be required. Is that still a question?
Yeah, I believe it will be. Every certified operation has a unique 10-digit number issued by the National Organic Program, and that is something that you can find in the integrity database. And so that information will be included here. That will because this is all being shared with CBP, and then National Organic Program compliance staff will be monitoring that data. They'll be able to see if if there's a digit that doesn't appear in the database, and in turn, the whole background on this is to prevent fraud. They'll be following up on those codes that don't exist, or that look a little off, and be following up in that monitoring.
Okay, so it's not in terms of the exporters who have been already doing this process. It's just that now this linkage with the organic integrity database, and that marrying up of these certificates properly with every customs entry, and aligning with the certification of the importer.
Yeah.
So, and I think that was one, one question was, do foreign producers of wine and spirits need to do anything differently? Or is the only requirement for the importer of record to make sure their broker marries the NOP certificate? So I would say that is, one of the key changes that obviously this document will be uploaded, and that the importer needs to be certified. And another question was that, as an importer, do we need one certificate, even if suppliers have different certifiers? I would say, yes, you're going to get certified by your certifier here in the USA, as you'll have one certification. Your foreign suppliers may use different entities as their certifiers.
Correct.
Scott, does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You as an entity here in the US as an importer will be certified to the USDA and receive that certificate and that 10-digit code we talked about. But you'll be sourcing from a number of operations, presumably in the EU or wherever you're coming from. That one kind of nuance maybe of a previous question on those certificates, that we have equivalency with a number of regions because we found our regulations to be similar enough, not identical. But that means that with that, those operations that you're sourcing from will not necessarily be USDA organic certified. They'll be certified to the EU standards by any number of EU-based certifiers. So those just to give a little bit of background on how that works.
And
hopefully
I think
that
that
didn't muddy the waters.
No, but I think there is a lot of question on, again, the sort of EU reciprocity agreements, whether there's like South America, there's organic wines, other areas, there's organic wines. And I think that, one of the questions does mention, does the import in the US need to encourage all foreign producers to align with certifiers? So even though the foreign producer might have their products certified in their country, it doesn't mean that the foreign certifier knows that there is this new, and this question mentions FDA, but it's really USDA requirement in the States. So I guess, yeah, in terms of bringing suppliers in alignment with this new regulation, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, you for the non-equivalent countries, you will need to then have those operations, those producers will need to be certified to directly to USDA, is my understanding. So while we have equivalency with certain regions, not all of those, we don't have it with all of them. So you see that with any number of products where it's another layer of certification. They may be certified to a standard within their own country. We have trade arrangements with certain areas such as New Zealand, where we don't have equivalency, but we have processes to bring that wine, that product into the US market.
Okay, so I think in brief too, that yes, you don't make sure your producers know of the new rules. And if there's questions too, I think that's where your US certifiers should be able to help guide you with some of these issues as well. And some of these US certifiers do have operations overseas.
Yes, yep, indeed. And there's a couple good resources, both and we can share this either in the chat or after the presentation here. There's specific resources for what that global landscape looks like, who we have equivalencies with, who we don't, what trade, what is needed to conduct trade, and both our association and NOP have some really good resources that kind of show that pretty succinctly. More than I could go into detail here.
Yeah, it's a lot of data. That's what I mean. We can help pull some of this together, for those of you who have questions on this as well. Just to get through a couple more questions, and we'll try to get wrapped up pretty quickly. Is there a new import certificate for every shipment? I believe that is the case, that every shipment must have an NOP. Or-
No, actually,
Oh, okay, good.
that's where this regulation allows for a quantity or period of time to be expressed. And I'd have to look more closely at the field here to see exactly. But there are fields that allow for these to be issued for that period of time. Again, acknowledging that, especially again, when it comes to produce, you've got a lot of fresh produce coming across the Mexico and Canadian borders, especially just, multiple loads a day. And so to reduce the burden of requesting those for each shipment, the USDA acknowledges that that's impractical, that the term of allowance, if you will, the term of validity for a certificate will be determined by the certifier. They are required to have a risk-based assessment and sort of SOP to determine that. With something like sealed tamper-evident wine, I would see very, very few instances where they would not, if any, they would not issue something for a broad period of time.
Okay. Yeah, and it's interesting because it doesn't, I'm not seeing, say, a date to and from date on this, so we can work to clarify that. I do see like number of containers, if you knew you were going to do 20 containers, perhaps that's an area. So I think we do need a little clarification on that. I think it's interesting too, and as we look at this form in the fields 14 and 15, final handler and certifying body of final handler. The final handler on much of this product might be actually, it's going to be the delivery truck, handing it off to a retail operation. So that, that entity is exempt. So what would you suggest here? How do those fields, how should those fields work? Any idea?
I think those will be determined working with the exporting entity will be determined and will determine that. I will say in the last few days, last couple of days, I've been made aware that in some instances, the way that the EU defines exporter is different than what is defined under our regulation. So it's on my list to dig into that a little more. I'm going to be at BioFoc, which is a very large organic trade show next week, and trying to get to the bottom of some of these lingering questions, which would be happy to share out.
Yeah.
And just a real quick note on that, this is a certificate that has been in use for quite a number of years now, and the fields that you see here are not entirely representative of what will be displayed in what you get. I have not heard that they are updating this form, but I think you will see in those fields more information. And so I have essentially the instruction document for entering information. If within that, in box 3, there is it can be issued and edited for up to 18 months from its initial start date. So that allows that flexibility to issue these I guess to be clear, you will have to have an NOP import certificate for each shipment. You will not need a new one for each shipment, depending on how that is determined with you and your certifier.
Excellent. Okay. There's a couple other questions that I'll just pop into. There was a question on whether we should ask wine producers to notate organic on the outer shipper. I think on the outer case is good, but I think it's the final products that's the most important. But Scott, do you have a comment on that and where that labeling of organic needs to be?
It depends. If we're talking about a non-retail bulk container or a case pallet, that will need some sort of indicator of organic if it's not evident on what the rule calls a retail package. So
most of the wine is imported in, like, say, a 12-pack in a case that's coming on a pallet. So each case should, in theory, be marked organic on the outer packaging. Okay.
Should be indicated that way, yeah.
I'm just going to scroll through. There is a very specific question from someone on the harmonized tariff number for the organic wine getting flagged for the automated manifest system in terms of, I'm assuming this is on the AMS transmission. I'm going to dig into that a little more to get you a more succinct answer. Because I really, want to get the detail on that. So I'm sorry if we're not answering that one live, but we will get back to you on that particular issue of transmission in the AMS system and the linkage of the HDS number and NOP. So hold off on that. We'll get back to you. Scrolling through a few more, I think we have answered most of these. And there was a question. I think we answered the equivalency question. We can get some more detail on that, but Scott was mentioning the different countries that have equivalency. There was a question on other farming practices such as bio and sustainable. Are they exempt? And I'm assuming you're talking about if your producer is, listed as a biodynamic farmer or, sustainable practice. Scott, any comment on those terms in terms of how it relates to this rule?
I would say bio, BIO is generally seen as an organic claim. Natural, sustainable, the various other wine certifications that we've seen out there would not be considered an organic claim. But my understanding is that the organic and the bio would be considered an organic claim if those are being used.
Okay. I think we've hit on virtually all of the questions, and we are a little over time. So I do want to be conscious of Scott's time frame and everybody else's. So what we will do is we do have all of the questions on file. We will do another FAQ sheet similar to what we did after the first webinar and circulate that to all attendees. So if we haven't hit your question now, we will make sure it is answered, and again, get the circulation of all of these answers to everybody so you have a record of it. Really appreciate everyone's attendance. And again, can't thank Scott enough for joining us once again and putting his time into helping our industry understand this new rule. Please reach out to us with additional questions, and we'll determine if, as this goes along, if things change, if we get more information, we will continue to run these webinars until everybody is 100% confident of the process. So again, thank you all. Thank you always to Gretchen, who organizes these, puts the decks together, and Jillian, who has been really digging deep into the law and communicating to all of you. So again, thanks, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Allison. Great to be here.
Thanks, Scott. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.